Welcome to Grail Country. We're continuing along our journey with Dante and our meditations on the Divine Comedy. This time we're up to Canto 4 of the Inferno. And Sherry is going to start reading that in any moment. We did not record last week because we got a late start and I needed to go visit my mom, so we just decided to punt. But we're picking back up this week. We'll try not to miss too many sessions, but things will happen from time to time. And because we have a long journey ahead of us.
The long road to hell.
Well, it's not only there are other parts too. That's just the Inferno.
We're on, what's that famous line? We're on the highway to hell.
Or as Winston Churchill says, when you're going through hell, keep going.
Yeah, keep going. Yeah, right. Yeah.
Good literary advice.
Yeah, for real. That really is. That's a good advice to writers too, right? That's like you got to push through that place where you hate what you're doing. Yeah.
Well, Sherry,
okay, I'm gonna get going here.
Okay, well, let me get my screen sharing so the audience will be able to see the. Are you guys able to see? Yep, there we go. Okay, we're good.
Oh, wait a minute. Where am I here?
It should be, the first line should be, a monstrous clap of thunder broke apart.
We're on 4?
Canto 4, yeah.
Oh, that's why, because I'm in 6. I got it backwards.
No problem.
I'm terrible with Roman numerals.
You can see why we stopped using them.
Okay, here we go.
Except for Super Bowls.
A monstrous clap of thunder broke apart, the swoon that stuffed my head. Like one awakened by violent hands, I leaped up with a start. And having risen, rested, and renewed, I studied out the landmarks of the gloom to find my bearings there as best I could. And I found I stood on the very brink of the valley, called the dolorous abyss, the desolate chasm, where rolls the thunder of hell's eternal cry. So depthless, deep, and nebulous and dim, that stare as I might into its frightful pit, it gave me back no feature and no bottom. Death pale, the poet spoke. Now let us go into the blind world waiting here below us. I will lead the way and you shall follow. And I, sick with alarm at his new pallor, cried out, how can I go this way when you, who are my strength in doubt, turn pale with terror? And he, the pain of these below us here, drains the color from my face for pity, and leaves this pallor you mistake for fear. Now let us go, for a long road awaits us. So he entered, and so he led me in to the first circle and ledge of the abyss. No tortured wailing rose to greet us here, but sounds of sighing rose from every side, sending a tremor through the timeless air, a grief breathed out of untormented sadness, the passive state of those who dwelled apart. Men, women, children, a dim and endless congress. And the master said to me, you do not question what souls these are that suffer here before you. I wish you to know before you travel on that these were sinless, and still their merits fail, for they lacked baptism's grace, which is the door of the true faith you were born to. Their birth fell before the age of the Christian mysteries, and so they did not worship God's Trinity in fullest duty. I am one of these. For such defects are we lost, though spared the fire, and suffering hell in one affliction only, that without hope we live on in desire. I thought how many worthy souls there were, suspended in that limbo, and a weight closed on my heart for what the noblest suffer. Instruct me, master, and most noble sir, I prayed him then, better to understand the perfect creed that conquers every error. Has any by his own or another's merit gone ever from this place to blessedness? He sensed my inner question and answered it. I was still new to this estate of tears, when a mighty one descended here among us, crowned with the sign of his victorious years. He took us from the shade of our first parent, of Abel, his pure son, of ancient Noah, of Moses, the bringer of law, the obedient, Father Abraham, David the king, Israel with his father and his children, Rachel, the holy vessel of his blessing, and many more he chose for elevation among the elect. And before these, you must know, no human soul had ever won salvation. We had not paused as he spoke, but held our road and passed meanwhile beyond a press of souls crowded about like trees in a thick wood. And we had not traveled far from where I woke, when I made out a radiance before us that struck away a hemisphere of dark. We were still some distance back in the long night, yet near enough that I half saw, half sensed what quality of souls lived in that light. O ornament of wisdom and of art, what souls are these whose merit lights their way even in hell? What joy sets them apart? And he to me, the signature of honor they left on earth is recognized in heaven and wins them ease in hell out of God's favor. And as he spoke, a voice rang on the air. Honor the Prince of Poets. The soul and glory that went from us returns. He is here, he is here. The cry ceased, and the echo passed from hearing. I saw 4 mighty presences come toward us, with neither joy nor sorrow in their bearing. Note well, my master said as they came on, that soul that leads the rest with sword in hand, as if he were their captain and champion. It is Homer, singing master of the earth. Next after him is Horace, the satirist. Ovid is third, and Lucan is the fourth. Since all of these have part in the high name, the voice proclaimed calling me Prince of Poets, the honor that they do me honors them. So I gathered at the edge of light, the masters of that highest school whose song outsoars all others like an eagle's flight. And after they had talked together a while, they turned and welcomed me most graciously, at which I saw my approving master smile. And they honored me far beyond courtesy, for they included me in their own number, making me 6th in that high company. So we moved toward the light, and as we passed, we spoke of things as well omitted here as it was sweet to touch on there. At last, we reached the base of a great citadel, circled by 7 towering battlements, and by a sweet brook flowing round them all. This we passed over, as if it were firm ground. Through 7 gates I entered with those sages, and came to a green meadow blooming round. There, with a solemn and majestic poise, stood many people gathered in the light, speaking infrequently and with muted voice. Past that enameled green we 6 withdrew into a luminous and open height, from which each soul among them stood in view. And there directly before me on the green, the master souls of time were shown to me. I glory in the glory I have seen. Electra stood in a great company, among whom I saw Hector and Aeneas and Caesar in armor with his falcon's eye. I saw Camilla and the queen Amazon across the field. I saw the Latian king seated there with his daughter by his throne, and the good Brutus who overthrew the Tarquin. Lucrezia, Julia, Marcia, and Cornelia, and by himself apart the Saladine. And raising my eyes a little, I saw on high Aristotle, the master of those who know, ringed by the great souls of philosophy. All wait upon him for their honor and his. I saw Socrates and Plato at his side, before all others there. Democritus, who ascribes the world to chance, Diogenes, and with him there Thales, Anaxagoras, Zeno, Heraclitus, Empedocles, and I saw the wise collector and analyst, Dioscorus, I saw Orpheus there, Tully, Linus, Seneca the moralist, Euclid the geometer, and Ptolemy, Hippocrates, Galen, Avicenna, and Averroes of the great commentary. I cannot count so much nobility. My longer theme pursues me, so that often the words fall short of the reality. The company of 6 is reduced by 4. My master leads me by another road, out of that serenity to the roar and trembling air of hell. I pass from light into the kingdom of eternal night.
Mm. Mm.
Well, it
Oh.
sounds like you're dying to say something there, Ted.
Oh
So
man.
go ahead,
I-
jump in.
Again, like it's just shocking to me. I think there's 100 of these cantos, and like there's so much here. Okay,
Yeah.
but so the first thing that struck me first, and again, I'm gonna try to get my head in the space if I'm just coming to this, but if I can say one thing, the amount of there's this bouncing back between every part of the comedy all the time, and it's just there's so many things in here that when you get to the end you'll be thinking about and like come back and look at this. Yeah, there's, it's interesting. It's like I know we're going into the depths of hell, and so I mean he said that there's nothing to see. First of all, that's interesting, and then there's this brief moment of light like on the edge
In a garden.
in a garden and a city. It's a garden and a city. But I think the highest level thing that I noted, right, because Dante has this notion of being this sort of sour puss of a poet and having this really negative view of things. But like Dante considers it a punishment to not have joy, right? So it's not. We have. Let me unpack that a little bit more. It's not enough to just not suffer because these souls aren't suffering. It's punishment to. There's human beings are something that like properly are supposed to be vessels of joy. That's the first thing that I see when I read this is
Nice.
Dante is saying like it's not enough just to be wise and to not suffer and to live well. Those aren't enough. Now
That's kind of like that's almost like you're just waiting for something to happen.
right that there's this whole other thing that's it's joy and love, and so like to have all of that, to have what do they call it, like eudaimonia or something, but to not have joy and charity
Yeah.
is still to be in hell in Dante's view, which to
Yeah,
me is
because you're not really entering in, right? If you don't have those things. You're afraid.
Yeah.
You're still grasped by fear, I think, because you're afraid. And I know the feeling. I've had it, where you're like, should I get really happy about this? Because if I do, I might jinx it.
I just want to like to get. I think Dante in this is actually praising human. Like it's a great praise of what he thinks people are, and I love that. I think that I think he's saying, I think this is actually a very high view of man to say.
It's interesting because the whole time I was reading this, I was remembering seeing icons in Orthodox churches. Not icons, but well, yeah, iconography in the churches of those characters. They're in
In the Narthex, yeah,
they're there.
Yeah.
I wonder if that's where he gets the image, right, from the architecture of the church, because they're not right in the sanctuary, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
See, I feel like Pajot's brought that up at some point. Like
Oh yeah.
heard this before, and it's like not to I'm not knocking you at all. Like that's such a great point. Like it really does feel like you're walking into a church, and like here they are, and even Virgil, like narratively, Virgil's fulfilling that function as as the icons, as the images of the great non-Christians who are because you can see them as falling short, or you can see them as God's gift to us. As this
that's to me, like coming to this for the first time.
Yeah.
That's how Dante sees them. That's what I would say.
Oh, it's so positive. His terms are so positive. I mean, like,
and they're standing in the light.
They're standing in the light. He glories in the glory that he saw. It's like, wow, that's some language right there.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think, Nate? What are your first impressions?
I'm trying to find. There's a line that I'm trying to find that I've been looking for while you guys were talking. I've been listening and looking for the line, but there was a line that caught my attention. I'm trying to find where he he refused to he basically he refused to say, where he talks about the conversation that he had with
Oh,
these
yeah, what he says
luminary poets.
it was as
And
sweet to it was as sweet to talk then as it is good to admit it now.
yeah, right, exactly. And it's like, I won't tell you.
Yeah.
So he's hinting that there's more to the story.
Well, wait, I say that line again,
And
Ted.
I think it's not disconnected from the from the hard questions that he asks of
Yeah.
Virgil either.
I
And
can't
I am I'm trying to find the line.
yeah, I can't quote it verbatim.
You had I can't quote it verbatim either, but you had the gist of it. The gist of it is like, here we go. So there's light.
Yeah.
And we can see this from the same so it's from the same thing that brought my attention to it. I would also point out there is light there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I know that's important. Yeah.
Right. So we move toward the light, and as we pass, we spoke of things as well omitted here as it was sweet to touch on there. That to me is like Dante's saying a lot there. And that at that, especially
Oh yeah.
also earlier, he's asking, he's like he feels, the impact of, of these souls in this place, and he's asking Virgil if there's any hope, and Virgil tells him about the harrowing of hell and his memory of it, right?
What a beautiful description of Christ.
And then he comes back, and then here he comes back to you later, and he's like, so we moved toward the light, and as we passed, we spoke of things as well omitted here as it was sweet to touch on there. So there's light in the place, and he's telling you there are things that he learned that he's not necessarily willing to tell you, probably because I would say two things about that. Like, one, he doesn't want to get himself in trouble, and two, he thinks they're things that you should learn yourself.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's good. That's good.
So part of what's going on with Dante is that he I think, and I can't remember where this is in his own writings, but he says like that the fourfold like textual interpretation that the church fathers gave. He's like, my poem should be read that way as well. Mm-hmm. So, and it's like, it's obvious that all sorts of things are going on there. Hey, I think our power's on, so I should be good.
So we're not going to lose you suddenly.
Thank God.
yeah. We got electricity. It looks like. So okay. So you've got this. Wow. I just realized how much I was like, oh, I got to get it out. No. So there's all sorts of things going on, and again, Richard Rowland and Jonathan Pageau's conversation on reading old texts, medieval texts. I just like this idea that, I mean, which is basically like reading poetry is what I felt like a lot of what they were saying was. And it's this notion that we're not doing one-to-one here. It's many-to-many. It's many-to-many correspondence. And so there's a lot of things going on here. So that's just a preface to say that when I look at this, I don't think, well, you need to reduce this to the mere level of allegory. But I think that this is still true. Look at how this happens. So Dante walks in, he's with Virgil. And the great poets, Dante's great poets, gather him in, and they take him in. And who do they bring him to? They bring him to the philosophers.
Yep.
And I think the philosophers and the great heroes of the past, right? Yeah. Those who established peace, right? Because that Dante's view seems to be that Rome is like, he says this, right? When Virgil's introduced, like this is in the text, that like, his view is that God used Aeneas to establish Rome so that you could have Christendom in the world. And so all of these great Roman heroes, he sees as part of divine providence. They're not just like the old pagan people who fought over stuff. It's like, no, God used Camillus. He used the Latin kings. He used all these people, like part of his very specific divine plan to establish the church and to establish Rome. And so there's this beautiful picture there. So one is, you've got in Dante's own life, poetry leading him to philosophy, right? All the way to the highest forms of philosophy. So that's happening in an abbreviated form here with the dim light of limbo. But we already know that Virgil, the poet, is going to lead him to Beatrice, who has come from heaven. Beatrice is the vessel of divine light, right? The light of heaven is in her eyes. And so there's this twofold pattern. One, Dante is saying, you know, the poets led me to the philosophers, but also Virgil is leading me to Beatrice. And that pattern, I love that. And like, you know, this poetry thing that we're doing in Arkansas in November, it's like, this is part of the reason that I think it's worth doing that, because I think that poetry appropriately does that.
What are you doing? You have to tell me what you're doing
Yeah,
with poetry.
tell the audience about it.
Oh yeah, okay. So third week in November, November 17th and 18th, I think it is. We're doing a like this little corner get together for 2 days, and it's all about poetry.
Oh, nice.
And so yeah, it should be wonderful. Actually, my one plug, if you want to hear more about it, I think Paul's putting it up on his channel on Monday. We had a conversation with me, Father Eric, and Dr. Jim on kind of what it's going to be. And really, it's just an apology for why we should all be dealing with poetry. And so what's really fun is like, this is it. Like, that's like why you should do it, but this is it. Here we are, we're doing it. And I think but Virgil, okay, here's what I want to get at though. Poetry is not just something that like hands you off to philosophy. Here you go, here's philosophy, you're good to go. Right? It's not like you grow past philosophy, because they leave Aristotle, and then it's Virgil. It's not Aristotle who takes Dante into the pit of hell.
Well, I think poetry is actually deeper than philosophy, to be honest with you.
I completely agree with you. And I think that's what Dante's saying. I think that's what Dante's saying, right? They're like, wow, here's Aristotle. And then Aristotle stays there, and it's Virgil who's taken him down into the pit of hell.
I'll tell you why specifically. And actually, the Rilke poem that Sherry shared before we started recording very much put this in my mind, because I've always, like, Sherry and I did an episode once where we actually talked about like the connection between poetry and prayer.
Mm-hmm.
But that particular Rilke poem like illustrated it like very, you could see how that poem like really fits that paradigm. Like that poem was definitely clearly a prayer.
Should I read it, Nate?
Yeah, sure.
I'm gonna grab some coffee really quick, but
yeah, sure. Grab some coffee, and we'll have Sherry share the Rilke. Do you want to read your own translation?
I'm reading my translation because I think it's the best.
I agree. We compared it side by side with the standard translation from poetry.org, and I thought Sherry's translation was better.
So you're saying that this is like a prayer, eh? Okay.
Yep.
I am too alone in the world, and yet not alone enough to consecrate every hour. I am too small in the world, and yet not small enough to be in front of you, like a thing, dark and clever. I want my will, and want to accompany my will through paths to action. And I want, in quiet, somehow hesitant times, when something approaches, to be among those who know, or alone. I always want to reflect you in full form, and I never want to be blind or too old to hold your heavy swaying image. I want to unfold. I don't want to stay bent anywhere, for there I am a lie where I am bent. And I want my sense true before you. I want to describe myself like a picture I saw long and near, like a word I understood, like my everyday mug, like my mother's face, like a ship that carried me through the deadliest storm.
Who's he talking to?
He's talking to everyone and God.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Which last time I checked, that's a prayer.
Exactly.
well, look, I mean, this is what Father Eric's going to be talking about too, right? Is he, because he's a priest, and so he prays through the Psalms every week. It's like, you know, that notion of prayer and poetry goes back to the very beginning of Jewish worship, and then the church picked it up in a major way. Yeah, Sherry, would you be willing to email that to me? I have a friend who I think would just love to read that, and if you're willing to share it, I want to pass it on to him.
It's not mine. It's a Rilke poem.
Well, it's your translation of it, so
yeah, it is.
Wow, there's a lot of Dante in that, honestly, and you know, I don't want to be bent anywhere, because there I am a lie. I'm like, that's the Inferno right there. That's
why that's one of the lines that makes it clear that he's talking to God.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I love the very first line when he says, I am too alone in the world, and yet not alone enough to consecrate every hour.
The
I
consecrated
love that.
hour,
Like
yeah.
there's just so much in there,
Yeah.
you know? I'm
Yeah.
too small and yet not small enough to be in front of you like a thing.
Yeah.
Like
Oh
it's
man.
incredible.
That's just like in Till We Have Faces, right? It's like, how can the gods look us in the face until we have a face to look at them with?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Right.
then the line, I want my will. Sorry, we're getting off track, but I want my will and I want to accompany my will. So it's like these two modes of being, like, you know, it's a Vervaekian image, really. Yeah.
That's St. Paul's cry of, I do what I do not want to do. There's this weird thing of when you start paying attention to your will, you realize how your will has a large degree of autonomy from you.
Oh, tell me about it.
And like that is, you know, in at least in the Christian West, like that's a major articulation of sanctification, is that you become united with your will.
Yeah, like we truly live in a kind of cognitive dissonance with ourselves.
Which we've already seen with Dante, right? He sees that in himself.
Well, okay, I want to tie this back to Dante for a reason here, because Ted, I know you said that they don't have any joy, but I don't think that's true. I think there are obvious, like particularly when he describes the scene in the, you know, the citadel with the meadow and the light, and there's joy, and there's certainly joy in one another's company, if nothing else.
Oh yeah, because he feels
which
honored.
Dante also is enjoying. But what he actually says, he doesn't say that it's not joy that they have. It's not joy. He doesn't say it's joy that they lack. He says they have no hope, but only desire.
Oh, interesting. Well, okay, I'll tell you the particular textual reference I was pulling from, Nate, was when the poets come up to him. It says something about the continents having neither sadness nor joy.
Gotcha. Oh, okay.
That's what I was reading from.
Because I wanted to make, before we go further, because you were talking before about this hierarchical chain of, you know, of God's providence, right, through all these, well, let's just call them pagans for the, you know, sake of brevity.
Let's take Dante at his word. They're pagans. It doesn't. Dante is, look, one of the things that I love about Dante is like he can see good in something. Like he sees good in stuff, right? He's not like, oh yeah, these guys are pagan heretics, so like,
no. But before he lists that genealogy, that historical genealogy, because that's essentially what it is for him. Like that's his genealogy.
Yeah, it's definitely, it is the genealogy that like an Italian would give of their own history.
And then, but before that, he lists the genealogy of humanity through.
Yes.
Right. So that's interesting to me because he's connecting the dots, and I love it when people do that, you know. So he's like, tuck, 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 tuck. We're going through these people, and now I'm here, and then we've got this, right? Connection.
This is universal history right here. Like the whole notion of universal history. Like it's as simple as that. Dante's saying like, here's Adam, here's Aeneas.
But he's also accrediting, I think, to a certain extent, those people in his genealogy for his own salvation.
Yes. Oh, I love that, Sherry. No, that's fantastic. Well, because, you know, it's so interesting. There's something even of the incarnation there too, right? Where it's like, you know, Christ's divinity is from God and his divinity is from the Blessed Virgin Mary, from the people, from a person. And I think Dante sees this too, right? Like his Italian bodily heritage is that of the, you know, the Latin pagans, and then his new birth, right? Because we have an explicit reference to baptism, which is interesting in here. His natural birth is from the Latins, and his new birth is from the Jews, right? And we've got both of those there, and he sees himself as a child of both, I think.
I find the reference to baptism really interesting. Do you know where that is exactly?
Oh, it's when he's explaining like basically like why these souls are here, and it's because they lack baptism's grace, like even though they were virtuous people,
right?
They were unbaptized. Here's the thing though, is like there's an interesting omission on Dante's part that would have been expectation of a contemporary reader. And he doesn't
Oh,
mention infants at all.
that's so true.
He
It
completely
did say
leaves that
children in
out.
the very
He
beginning,
says
though.
children, but he doesn't say
Yeah.
like the unbaptized infants would have been like one of the primary expectations of like
Of limbo.
of
Yeah.
But
limbo.
I'm wondering if he's
Collapsing that in that word.
poetically bending baptism too. Like that was a feeling that I had.
Well, I think he's poetically dropping lots of hints. So
Because baptism is representative of a death, right? And a rebirth. And
Oh my goodness. Oh, they walk over the river. That was always such a weird thing. They don't go through the water. You walk over the river. You don't pass through the water.
right.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, there you go. Okay. Right, because if you pass through the water, it'd be this baptism. That's not how you end up in limbo. You just walk right over it. You don't go through that death.
Right. And if you want to, take that imagery all the way back, that's the parting of the Red Sea, right? Like,
yes.
So there's something beautifully poetic about the way that he's putting it. Like he's to read it at first you can be happy with the fact that baptism was mentioned as an initiation, but I think for him it's actually much, much deeper than that. That's my impression just upon first reading it. So, but I'd like to find it. I can't find it for some reason.
What are you looking for?
Oh, here. I wished you to know before you travel on that these were sinless, and still their merits fail, for they lacked baptism's grace, which is the door of the true faith you were born to. Their birth fell before the age of the Christian mysteries. So, yeah, that's what that first line, I wish you to know before you travel on that these were sinless.
Yeah. Wow.
That's a big like that's not the baptism's grace thing kind of covers up that first line. You know what I mean? For a lot of readers. That's a big statement. So anyway, I just think that he's, I don't know, maybe I don't know the poem, so I suppose there's going to be more water imagery coming or something.
Well, he also says that he also says that when he describes the harrowing of hell, he ends that by saying, and no soul was saved before that.
Yeah.
Like so, but that's apparently he's forgotten about Enoch
and Elijah.
Hmm.
So
yeah.
Well, he can't know everything. Come on, guys.
Well, no, I mean, but that's a great point, because it's not Dante who says that; it's Virgil who says that, right? Because
that's right.
that Virgil doesn't have. Virgil is something like the very best of the pagan, and I mean pagan in the technical sense. He's the very best of the pagan world. Like, you could not have a better pagan than Virgil.
Right.
And so there's a sense in which it's like, yes, and yet there's this whole other thing. This other thing of God loves his creation so much, sometimes he sweeps down and just takes someone up to heaven with him.
Right.
Like, that's outside of Virgil's mind. I think.
What is it that he definitely explicitly says that they lack?
It's merit. No.
It's hope.
It's hope. That's right. Yes.
Hope.
Yes. Hope.
They have desire, but no hope.
Yeah, because hope is the resurrection.
So that means that they still long for it, but they dare not. They have no hope, so they dare not think that they can have what they long for. So and yet they talk to things that he doesn't want to tell us about, and there's a light shining in this place.
So in my little encounters with the Aeneid, which are not much, but there's early on and maybe in the second book, there's this part where, because Aeneas is the son of Venus, right? So she's really on his side, and there's this. They end up on the North African coast, and he has this. He's like, they don't know where they are. And so she shows up as this native huntress, right? And they have this conversation about how they can get to Carthage. And it's only as and then she turns around and leaves, and he realizes, oh, that's a goddess. I was speaking with a goddess. And there's this heartbreaking passage where Aeneas is crying out and saying, why can we not talk face to face? Why are there always these disguises?
Mm-hmm.
And he's talking to the gods. And so that just strikes me as so poignant, right? They desire but no hope, right? It's exactly that in what Aeneas is saying. He's like, the divine is there,
but it's veiled. It's veiled.
Always veiled. There's no hope. There's
Aeneas,
no hope.
Aeneas is that's very interesting.
And that's kind of interesting because I'm just thinking about like Norse mythology. You never know when you're going to meet a god, right? Like, so, right. Which is kind of interesting because it gives you a sacramental view of everything, right? Like you really need to be treating things in a very good way.
That's it. That enters into Christian thought with the idea of entertaining angels unawares.
That's exactly what
yeah.
Which echoes that same thing where it's like, instead of it like being, Grimnir in one of his many disguises, it's an angel.
But but to that again, I this thing that keeps coming back to me is the stuff that Dante is saying is actually, if you look at it the right way, like the bottom drops out on how good things can be, right? Because is it good to encounter the divine veiled in creation? Yes. What if that was the best at God? Well, okay. But Dante is suggesting that because we're contrasting that with the beatific vision, where you actually see God face to face, right? And so if all you have, if you're in creation, the sacraments are like, they're so good. The sacraments, but imagine that was all you ever had. So there's a difference between the sacraments as being the way that you encounter the divine, and there's something else, which is the sacraments are what you get now until you see God face to face. And I think that's the difference between paradise and limbo, right? Because clearly what Dante is saying about the souls in limbo is that they really spoke true things and they really did good things, like really truly. But there's something else, right? And so they have this desire but no hope.
Well, here's the thing that makes it really odd. There's something really important that Dante is showing you here, that he's only doing it through his poetic images, but it's obvious that God is in this place. God is in this place. Like that's why you have light shining through. That's how you can have the citadel in the garden. It's like even in hell, God is there. There is no place from which God is absent.
Because they have being too. The
reason the souls don't see him is because they don't have hope. They have desire but no hope. It is their lack of hope that makes them unable to see, because they don't have the faith to actually claim what they desire.
Okay, so this is what I'm thinking. I'm thinking they have no hope and they have not passed through the waters of baptism. And in the previous canto, I can't remember, maybe it was 2 or maybe, I can't remember, said something about they have no hope of death, right? The people there. So, and those three are all very connected to me. And it is only through death that you experience the resurrection, right? Like you have to die.
And it's noteworthy here. These are all great.
You have to die.
These are all great men and women that we're talking about here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Is there a connection? I would ask the question: is there a connection from their inability to pass through that death and the fact that these are great and noble and glorious figures? Because the one who is the true door, that's not the appearance he takes on.
Yeah, but Christ went there.
He takes upon, right? Absolutely.
Right? And so when a mighty one descended here among us, crowned with the sign of his victorious years, I mean, I don't know the rest of the poem, but I have the sense that they're waiting on something.
Well, Nate, to your
But I don't
point,
know.
I just keep thinking of that Roke poem where it's like, I'm small, but not small enough.
Right.
Right. The mighty compared to God are small, but they're not small enough.
Right.
And yeah, there's
Because right, that's the thing. It's like, okay, so you have to, that's because you have to give up everything.
yes.
Like that's like, and that's harder for the more noble and mighty and glorious you are, the harder that is to do.
The harder that is to do. Sherry, I just keep
And that's
thinking.
that's what causes the desire and the hope to come in conflict. That's why they have no hope, because it's like they desire it, but they're not willing, but they don't have the will to do what would give them their desire.
Yeah.
And that would be passing through the waters of baptism,
Well,
which
I don't
means
know. I don't
which
get
is
that.
in fact a
That
death.
feeling for some reason. I don't
What
get
was
that
that?
feeling. I don't get the feeling that they're locking themselves into that place.
I'm not suggesting that.
Okay.
I'm not making the Lewis argument. What I'm saying is they
Okay.
don't yet see.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. I get a feeling like
But this is why the light is important. And the fact that he's like, hey, we talked about stuff that I'm not going to talk about here. Right?
Mhm.
Those are both super important, because that is a gesture toward the fact that even though they don't see the hope, there is hope.
Okay, so here's a question then, because I'm kind of I'm getting glimpses of where we're going here. So when he came in and crossed over the river, the demon said he's not supposed to be here, right? And was very angry about it.
Yeah.
And Virgil said, no, he is. So and this is going to jump us way right to the end, but I'm just going to ask it anyways. So is Dante the mediator for Virgil and everybody in that place? Because that is the role, in my opinion, of the human being, right? Is this mediation between heaven and earth. And I'm just wondering if what they're waiting for is Dante, is the human being.
You can see in Virgil's, and I would say it's a little bit more complicated than that, because you can see in several places in this poem where Virgil has acted as a mediator for Dante.
Yes, of course, but to move them from the place that they find themselves in, like they need a revelation, right?
Right. Yes.
That's what they need. And so anyway.
I think, regardless of what someone coming to the poem feels about it, I think Dante at least seems to be staunch enough on the, let's say, the Catholic notion of the personal judgment, that there's not, I in my encounters with it, I have not come across anything except a sense of finality in hell. And I think part of that is that Dante's wrestling with it too. The only change to come is the coming of their bodies.
Dante's wrestling with it, and he's being very conscious not to say anything that would be outside the received dogma of the church. He's also questioning it. And he's dropping hints that maybe, just maybe, there's hope for the hopeless.
There's options. Yeah.
But I mean, I do think that's actually very, like, in line with at least, again, with the Christian West, which has always been, as I've seen it in the tradition, it's always, we have no assurance of that, and yet we can all hope.
Yeah, it's kind of like, it's almost, I see hints of Dante's like private position being very close to von Balthasar.
Yeah. Okay, so place this historically for me, because I'm really dumb about this, but when did Dante write this?
1300.
Yeah.
Just
1300.
1300. So
what was the church/state political climate like at the time?
Interesting. I'll throw out the little bit that I know. Interesting. It's so, in the West, you're halfway between when Saint Dominic and Saint Francis were around, and the Reformation. So that's kind of, you have several major figures in the Western Church that rose up about 1100.
Yeah, that are shaking the church, right? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So then you've got, St. Thomas Aquinas and St. Bonaventure coming right behind that. And they obviously, and then Aristotle's kind of made his way back into the West about 200 years before this, 250 years. So there's some huge, there's a lot of dynamics going on.
Yeah, some earthquakes are happening.
Earthquakes are happening. We're still a ways out from the Reformation, though. And Italy is in political turmoil. And this is a big, you'll hear this over and over from Dante. Like he identifies his own situation in Italy a lot with the hellishness of the infernal city. And he longs. I mean, we saw that with the Greyhound and the Wolf, right? Like that.
So why was he, like, I got the sense from the very first episode that he was somehow ostracized.
Yeah, he's in exile. He wrote this in political exile.
Why?
Because the short answer is that there were warring political factions in Italy, in Florence, and he was on the losing side.
Okay.
So he was like a good Florentine, dead loyal to his side. They won, and then went like winning sides do. They fractured again, and then he ended up on the uphill side of that for a little while, and then they brought in some, other cities' leader, and all their armies came in, kicked Dante out. And he ended up spending the last 25, 30 years of his life in exile. There's some really poignant, we'll see this in the poem, right?
Okay.
He writes this, he writes it let me correct something I said. He writes it, it's set at 1300. He wrote it in the 1320s. And so there's all this, it's young Dante. Old Dante is writing it, old Dante Alighieri, the person, is writing it about this young pilgrim. And there'll be all these prophecies about his coming exile. And so I think Dante really feels like Dante, the pilgrim, right? Dante lived out the pilgrim life in the last years of his life. And there's this just bitterly poignant passage where he says, you will know the hardness of other men's stares and the bitterness of other men's bread. It's like, so Dante, yeah.
Do you know where he was in exile?
Mostly northern Italy. He kind of moved around. He ended up, I can't remember the name of the town, but there was a nobleman who took him in at the end and patronized him. And he was there. I think he was there until his death. It may have been Ravenna. I'm not sure. But basically, like, there's this great story where, he's buried in the churchyard there. And then Dante's fame exploded after the publishing of this. And a while later, Florence is like, hey, Dante was from Florence. We'd like to have his bones back. And they basically said, back off, man. You didn't want him. So they've still got his bones. They're not letting anyone have them.
Oh, Ravenna. So was the church in Ravenna? It was already there. Have you ever seen? There's a. Oh, you got to look at the images of that church.
Yeah.
That church is, and it's an Orthodox church, and it's just loaded with iconography.
Yeah, Mark Vernon did a video from there recently.
Yeah, and that's interesting because he mentions all those pagans that are in the narthex of the Orthodox churches. That's interesting.
Yeah, Dante's final days were spent in Ravenna. Okay, I'm glad I got that right. Yeah, he was invited to stay by Prince Guido de Polenta. Dante died in September 14th, so we actually just 1321. So the 700th anniversary of his death was 2 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, and the Orthodox position would have been less rigid on the salvation state of the pagans too.
Yes. Yes.
Which is part.
Yes.
So I'm telling you that's part, like, and I think he's like, he doesn't want to contradict anything that's, like, he's a poet, and he's already been embroiled in enough. Right, and he doesn't want the church on him on top of it, so he just has these little poetic hints. So he also says here, so I saw gathered at the edge of the light the masters of the highest school, whose song outsoars all others like an eagle's flight. Now, it's noteworthy that it's an eagle, because like symbolically, like the eagle is important because the eagle is noteworthy for being able to look at the sun.
Well,
So the eagle is able to bear the light of the sun, which has obvious symbolism. So he is suggesting that the beauty of their song somehow suggests that there is actually hope for these persons.
Well, yeah, sorry.
Virgil, I was just gonna say Virgil, you know, obviously, like Virgil is the one who brings them through hell right up to the top of Mount Purgatory. There's something in Virgil that's like bigger than Virgil,
right?
And I think that's, you know, so I mean, I'll let you know, like I tend to fall on the side of, I think Dante. Well, let's say at least Dante is willing to sit with the pain and the difficulty of the notion that he could be saved by someone who's not saved. Basically, that's his whole problem he's working out with Virgil. Now, does that mean that he doesn't have hope? Like, you get the impression that, like, you know, if Dante, that like Dante loves Virgil, like he really loves Virgil, and so it's interesting. It's how much there's just a lot of views on that. Yeah, I won't. He's willing to look. He's willing to at least, and I give him a lot of credit for this. He's willing to, like, put people he loves in hell, and I think that gives me a lot of respect for, let's say, him not being like a motivated reasoner, right? I mean, and there's just a lot, like, it makes me trust Dante more, that he's like clearly loves Virgil and is not just like, oh yeah, Virgil's one of the guys that totally made it out. Like,
well, you know, for me,
I think I think it indicates that he's dedicated of wrestling with the question,
and that there's a process. Okay, so like, this is because we have the image of it's rings, which I think is much better than a triangle, but it does have a hierarchy to it, right? It has there's a process of moving from the outside towards the center, and I would go to what Ted was saying earlier about
there being like different layers to reading what Dante is putting down, and I would say that
I agree.
There's a surface layer that never ever remotely contradicts the received teaching of the church in the early 14th century when Dante lived. Mm-hmm. Right? There's that layer of the text. But then there are other layers of the text that have images and symbols.
Well, that's the feeling I'm getting.
Gesture toward, but maybe.
Sure.
Well, that's the feeling I'm getting. Like, that's why I mentioned that thing about baptism, and he says before preceding, he says that they were sinless, right? So, like, he's definitely got. He has a rich understanding of it himself, but he's not crossing any lines at the moment. I don't know if he's going to, but
I wanted to. There's a point that I wanted to bring up again about that, and you know, and I mean, like, yeah, it does feel like there's some scandal in there, and I'd be curious what the Italian says, because I wonder if he is like more on the line. But to say, you know, they were without sin is a lot, but again, like, when you're thinking about Dante's notion of, because the whole thing is towards theosis, towards divinization, right? Like, this is what the poem is about. It's about the in-godding of man. It's really about the in-godding of Dante. But again, like, for those of us who grew up in this sort of Protestant moralist milieu, the notion of making it to heaven is about not having sinned, right? That's it. It's like, you're not doing bad things. And for Dante to say that they were sinless, but they didn't have the grace of baptism, he's saying something absolutely tremendous about the saints. That's the main thing that I read in that. He's saying that Caesar, Hector, Camilla, Homer, Aristotle, can you think of someone of greater glory on this earth? He's saying the least saint is something more than that. to me, I want to see that in a really positive way. To say that what,
no, see, I would agree with you. That's what I was gesturing toward.
okay, yeah, I
And
just
I would agree with that part, and I think that like there's a way in which he's suggesting that it is their very gloriousness that is the barrier that keeps from being able to cross that, to be able to enter into the river.
That's such an interesting notion, Nate. I like that. Feels like one of those. I'm just like, I want to just like chew on that. Well, also, I mean,
but I think he's also saying that I think he's also suggesting that doesn't mean that their perceived hopelessness is warranted, or that their state of hopelessness is warranted. Because they have no hope does not mean that there is no hope. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, I mean, I see the hint. I see what you're. I mean, I see the gestures that Dante's making there. Like, it's not nothing that there's these people are illuminated in hell. Like, poetically, that's so significant. You know, that it's real light. And again, like, to say, to at least, you know, stepping back from this hope of their salvation.
Well, okay. What is okay? So what is Dante's? What is the end state for Dante? What is it? It's beatific vision, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Which is the ultimate in illumination.
Yes, it's totally.
So there's no way that there's light here, and they're soaring toward the sun, suggested by the image of the eagle.
But their song is, and this is what's. I mean, this is the thing that, again, where Dante's wrestling, right? Because what does Beatrice say in the first canto? She says,
"Oh, I just saw another image that gestures toward that same thing."
Okay.
Right here. I just happened to catch it as I was talking. Electra stood in a great company, among whom I saw Hector and Aeneas, and Caesar in armor with his falcon's eye.
Mm-hmm. Well, but this, so on a poetic level, the sort of eagle falcon thing, it's really interesting because it's Rome, right? Rome obviously is the eagle, like, clearly Rome is the eagle, and yet you also have the Christian eagle, right? Which is like Saint John of the Apocalypse and the virtue of heavenly wisdom.
Yeah, but I think
and Saint John. What is the big motif in Saint John in the Gospel of John? It's light.
It's absolutely, yeah. Well, right. Yes.
Yeah. So it's about perceiving something in the future, which means something is approaching. Something is. I just want to reiterate that as a first-time reader, I get a sense that this is not a done deal. Right? Limbo itself indicates that anything can happen. Right? Like you're this is limbo.
Right, that there can be hope for the hopeless. I definitely think, I clearly think he's doing that. And I'll also say this. There is a little bit of, it's interesting because I'm glad that you brought up the eagle and John connection, and this is especially important with the illumination themes of John's gospel in particular. There's a little bit of a layer of Church of Peter and Church of John, as Tomberg puts it, going on here, where like the Church of Peter is like the guardian of the exoteric tradition that is like the straightforward and literal level of the tradition, which is important and cannot be dispensed with and is absolutely essential. But there's also the strain of the Church of John, which is the more esoteric
visionary
path of illumination.
It's sort of the visionary mystic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
and so he's almost suggesting here, it's like, I know according to the principles of the Church of Peter, these souls are lost, and yet let me gesture toward the eagle.
Look, I think that there's this weird thing there where it's like, and I'll be curious to see what y'all think as we move on down through hell, because Dante's response to the state of the souls is such an important thing, right? Like, right, even at the beginning of this, Virgil says, like, you're not asking me, but you should be asking me about these souls, right? Like,
Yes.
cares about how Dante is responding to these encounters. And there's this, it seems like here there's this sense of maybe it would be wrong for him not to hope. But then there's other places where it's a very different feeling. And so there's this, well, we're going to get more of it. We're going to get more of that Dante just saying, yeah, it just tops out.
Well,
Like,
okay, here, let me
I
just
can say this much. I can say this much and no more. And I think we're already, Nate, to your point about him saying, there are these things these poets told me that I'm not going to repeat here. I think we get a little bit of a hint of that already. That there's like, yeah, I can say this stuff. And then there's these other things. And like Paradise, it's like, you just keep hitting the ceiling. He's like, yep. And then I can't say anything else. Like, that's it.
Right.
Like, words get me this far, you know, over and over and over. And then you hear
but
that.
In this case, he actually says it would be inappropriate for him to talk about it.
Yeah. Well, you know, I do. There's a little whisper in the back of my head, Nate, that just says that that's Dante's economy as a storyteller. And I'll just throw that out there. Like, he seems to have such good sense about when to digress and when to not. There's a hilarious
right. But yes. But even if we want to attribute that to a storyteller's skill, which is a completely valid thing to say, it's not a skillful story move unless you're hinting at something
exactly
with that movement.
Listen,
yeah, you're not
as the explicit member of the Church of Peter here, you're making me work really hard to keep this train on the tracks.
Okay, I want to read something.
Yeah, imagine what it was like the week when I didn't have the Catholics here.
Oh my goodness.
And they honored me far beyond their courtesy, for they included me in their number, making me sixth in that high company. So we moved toward the light.
Move toward the light.
Yeah.
There you go, Sherry.
There's a reason why I have a feeling that this is not a done deal, okay? Like, I can't help, like, those things are really, they speak to me. The feeling.
And I don't think, and
I think that's what
Ted, I'm not trying to goad you into any kind of like explicit universalism here. I'm not trying to goad you anything that's beyond what's permitted toward you. Yeah, of course. It's Nate. When does Nate never just say it?
Exactly.
I'm not. But I would say that definitely Dante is like clearly through poetic images gesturing toward at least a kind of a nascent hopeful universalism, which is completely in bounds.
I totally
completely in bounds for a Catholic, because it's like, well, I mean, the Fatima prayer doesn't make any sense actually if it's not, if a hopeful universalism isn't in bounds, because why are you praying for them? Why are you praying for those souls at all? And you're praying especially for those in most need.
Look, I completely
of that mercy
agree on that. And on an explicit theological level, Dante's actually, look, it's a teaching of the church that we can't even know that Judas is in hell, right?
Right.
Much less some bad pope, much less the drunkard,
right,
down the street, Chiaco. It's like, no, we have assurance of no soul in hell. And so in that sense, yeah, I agree with you that hopeful universalism is 100% there. And so there's, again, and this is where I think I'd push back down into the primary level of discourse in the Inferno is not about the eschaton, but it is about the state of the individual soul. And this is Charles Williams' reading of it, is that we don't need to see this. Look, because, all right, so we've had the hopeful look at this canto. I'm gonna turn it the other way, which is that you can have all the great heroes, you can have the heroism, you can have the philosophers, you can have the poetry. If you don't have divine grace, you walk out of the light into the darkness, and it happens every time. So the really wonderful positive thing, and I love Dante's ability to do this. He does both all the time, and he doesn't deny either side of it. And like, it's just so good. It's just so good how he does that. And so there's this notion of, and like, look, this is, I live my life around this too, and it's like, it's not just enough to like be an educated humanitarian person. Like, that isn't enough. There's a darkness that'll get you, and whatever you do, death has to be integrated into that. Death and judgment have to be integrated into that. And I think you see a lot of this in Job. I think you see some of it. I think you see a lot of this in McDonald too, Sherry. I'd be curious to know what you think.
Totally. No, I totally agree with what you're saying. Yeah, like there, Jed said it well when he talked about McDonald. He said the interesting thing about McDonald is the severity of his message, right?
Yeah.
And that's because
McDonald's not playing at all.
He's not playing, no, but it's always optimistic.
Yes.
And so that has to do with hope, right? Which is what you guys were talking about before, because we have a hope, right? Because of the resurrection.
Well, actually, I think honestly, what we're talking about here on the both sides of it, it's like, I think Lilith is a perfect example of another work that shows that, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like,
well, like the little children say to Mara when it comes to Lilith, because Lilith is in Mara's house, which is the house of what? Bitter waters. That's what Mara means. And Lilith is there in Mara's house, and Mara's putting her through the paces, right? And one of the children says to Mara, "Are you going to have to hurt her?" And she said, "I don't think there's any other way around it, right? If I didn't love her, I wouldn't hurt her." And this is the thing about McDonald that I love, because he's not painting anything. I don't know. It's not all, sunshine and rainbows with McDonald at all, right? I mean, Lilith in the end gets her hand cut off.
Yeah.
And
So,
it's also important. Like, it's also important that she doesn't even know what she's holding on to.
That's right, and she's been holding it so long that her hand has grown together.
And that is the perfect image, because that is like that is the thing that we can't do, that only grace can do. And the thing that we're holding on to that we don't even know what it is and cannot let go of.
Right.
That's where grace has to enter.
And there's two images with Lilith where she sits on the waters. Okay, so that's a direct reference to the Whore of Babylon. She sits on the water, so all the waters are below the surface, and nobody has any water except her, and she baths in it. She's got fountains, and And when the hand gets cut off, he's instructed to take it out and bury it in a certain place, and he does. And from the hand flow all the waters. I'm like, just like,
so true.
It's hard for me not even. It's hard for me not even to cry right now.
Right.
So, like it, and so this is the thing. No matter what happens, no matter how brutal, no matter how painful, God's, what man meant for evil, God meant for good, right? Like I talked about this yesterday in the Boxer. There's this idea of cleaving asunder good and evil, right? And that's what we think we can do because we took from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. We think we know. And yet when we judge, when we want to cleave it asunder, we have cleaved asunder something that is so entangled that there's no way we can do that. Because what man meant for evil, God meant for good. So they're so entangled with each other, right?
Yeah, actually, Paul was talking about this.
We can't cleave it asunder.
Paul was talking about this in his video yesterday, and it's actually like I actually wanted to high five him because he had it so right. Because like, even in our like most twisted delusions and foolish actions. There's always like, once you get down behind the layers, there's always some good that was intermixed with that. Always.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean,
I would actually say that it's going to be, in the end, right? This is why I don't like talking about universalism. I like talking about apokatastasis, because it's the restoration of all things, and that's the image of Lilith's hand being buried in the wilderness, right? And the waters flowing from it.
Yeah, Tomberg is very good on this point, because he makes the point that like the only way to truly conquer evil is to transform it into good. There's no like there's actually no other way. He uses a very good practical real world analogy of that too. He talks about the Germany after the First World War. We thought we'd conquered them, but they ended up rising up again, versus Germany after World War II. We transformed them into a friend, and then we truly conquered them.
Yeah. Well, I don't, this gets back to the whole annihilationism argument that I make, because you can't destroy something. Like, if you're going to call something evil and you think you can just blot it out,
McDonald is also very clear on that in Lilith too.
Everything is about transformation, right? So it's all that is the only way that something is annihilated, is when it stops being evil and becomes the good,
which is what Lilith wants, right? Lilith wants annihilation, and she can't have it. Because it's just like, it cannot, like, that's like the one thing God absolutely cannot do.
Well, that in and of itself, Nate, is also a point of pride, right? I'm not going to become the good. I want you to annihilate me as the evil.
Yeah,
right.
Because
I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to bend the knee, right?
Too small, but not small enough.
Right.
Yep. Yeah. That's great. Yes. Yeah. There's so much here. We could keep going, but I think I want to give Ted, we've been talking. I want to give Ted a chance to respond. I really do.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying, like Ted, I am not trying to change anybody's. I'm just talking about what I see.
No, Nate, it's funny. You and I, we talked a little bit last week before I had to get off because I was on the road and there was crazy weather. And you were saying that one of the things that you really want to bring forward is this capacity to have mature conversation. So mature in the sense that, like, there's virtue in it, right? And it's like what a grown up in, like, that you're grown up, what grown ups could have. And so, yeah, I'm happy to have these conversations. I'm not gonna say, like, yes, I agree with you on these things. I don't agree with you.
There's it's not necessary to say that.
Completely unnecessary.
I know. And so if I don't have as much to say, I'm just like
listening.
I'm just listening. I'm hearing what you all have to say, and I'm trying. Well, for one reason is because, like, these, let's say, my general inclination towards some of these things is something much more like to accept the catechism and to pray the Fatima prayer. And, and that's where I am. And so I don't maybe drill into that. But then here we are. And so now I'm listening. Now I'm hearing I'm hearing what's going on. I think and I've probably said this a couple of times, but when I look at this, because it's actually come up a bunch recently, right? There's these two ways to look at the world. One is, where is God and where do I find God? Right. Okay. And it's like, so I think of the beginning of the Divine Liturgy of St. John Chrysostom. It's the prayer to God, who is everywhere present and fills all things. It's like, okay, where's God? God is everywhere.
Everywhere.
God is everywhere.
And not only there, but fills it. So I just want to read this quick quote out of Lilith here. This is what I was thinking about when I was talking before. So Adam says, nothing will ever close that wound. So this is the chopping off. He answered with a sigh, it must eat into her heart. Annihilation itself is no death to evil. Only good where evil was is evil dead. An evil thing must live with its evil until it chooses to be good. That alone is the slaying of evil.
Mm.
Only good where evil was is evil dead. It's so true. Like if you just give it like 3 minutes of thought. I don't see it any other way.
Well,
But
this
that's
is,
me.
yeah. I mean, there's a lot of resonance with that, and Augustine, St. Augustine introducing this notion of sin as the corruption of good. Like, how can
Mhm.
you destroy a wrong pattern by having the right pattern? It's like, but I was gonna say, so there's the side, so there's the two sides to that, right? Where is God? He's always and everywhere present. It's like that doesn't, and fills all things, like, but that doesn't mean that I'm gonna go to a crack house to try to find God, right? There's the question of where is God and where can he operate and where is his grace is found, and the
Right.
answer is everywhere all the time. And then there's the other question of what should Ted do, and that the answer to that is very different.
Of
That's
course.
participate in the mass, act righteously, in all these things. And so there's I'm trying to bring this out because with Dante, like at the end of the day, it's about the pilgrim. And the
Well,
pilgrim does
that's
not the pilgrim does not sit in hell waiting for with hope. The pilgrim walks through hell. All
what I
right.
was just going to say. Like this applies to you too, Ted. So what do you do with what you know, right? You keep going. And as
Yeah.
you do that, you walk through the different circles of hell. Like that is your life. Honestly,
Mhm.
you know,
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
we we always worry about people who are like, let's say at the bottom, right? Metaphorically speaking.
Yeah.
But we forget, we've already forgotten that that's where we came from.
Or
Okay? Like
or
we came from that place,
or
right?
even
And it's the place that you have to go through, and so that this is why it is the journey, right? And that's why this poem is a journey. That's why he's called a pilgrim, because he's not just on a carousel. He's not on a carousel. He's walking somewhere, and he's heading from the outer edges of it to the center of it, right?
Let me just share this little bit from Tomberg with you, Ted, because Tomberg is interesting. Because Tomberg actually, he affirms the doctrine. Tomberg is a devout Catholic, and he affirms the dogma of eternal hell, but he also affirms apokatastasis at the same time. And this is how he does it. This is what he says. He says,
bring it on.
eternal hell is unjust, however, only from a purely quantitative point of view. One compares the limited number of years of life or lives on earth with the unlimited number of years of eternity, and thus one arrives at the conclusion that the measure of chastisement is out of all proportion with the measure of the transgression, and that consequently there is no justice. But let us consider the problem of eternal hell, not from the point of view of quantity, which is absurd as time does not exist in eternity,
Mhm.
but rather from that of quality. How is it with this problem then? The following is the answer we arrive at when we abandon quantitative correlation between time and eternity. Whoever enters the region of eternity without an ounce of love enters it without an ounce of love, i.e., he enters eternal hell. For to live without love, this is hell. And to live without love in the region of eternity is to live in eternal hell. Hell is the state, and this is a quote from Berdayev. Hell is the state of the soul powerless to come out of itself, absolute self-centeredness, dark and evil isolation, the final inability to love. This subjective state of soul is neither long nor short. It is as intense as eternity is.
Mhm.
Similarly, the blessedness that a saint experiences is the vision of God, as it is as intense as eternity, although it could not so last, since someone present at the ecstasy of a saint would time it as a few minutes. The region of eternity is that of intensity, which surpasses the measures of quantity that we employ in time and space. Eternity is not a duration of infinite length. It is the intensity of quality, which, if compared with time and thus translated into the language of quantity, is comparable with an infinite duration.
Mm-hmm.
Thus, concerning this, Berdyaev says, in our life on earth, it is given us to experience torments that appear to us to go on forever, that are not for a moment, for an hour or a day, but seem to last an infinity. Objectively, this infinity may last a moment, an hour, or a day, but it receives the name of everlasting hell. When Origen said that Christ will remain on the cross so long as a single creature remains in hell, he expressed an eternal truth. What can one add to this, if not Amen? Eternal hell is the state of a soul imprisoned within itself, where the soul has no hope of coming out. Eternal means to say, without hope. All suicides committed through desperation bear witness to the reality of eternal hell as a state of soul. Before committing suicide, the person who commits it experiences a state of complete despair, i.e., eternal hell. This is why he prefers nothingness to the state of despair. Nothingness is therefore his last hope. Eternal bliss, heaven, is in contrast the state of a soul which is filled with boundless hope. This is not a blissfulness which lasts for an infinite number of years. It is the intensity of hope which gives the quality eternal. Similarly, it is the intensity of despair which imparts to the state of soul designated hell the equality eternal. The anguish of Gethsemane, which gave rise to perspiration of blood, was eternal. This night, the night of Gethsemane, was not measured in hours. It is immeasurable, therefore eternal. It is due to its eternity that he sweated blood, and not because of a temporary and therefore passing trial. He knew eternal hell through experience, and as he came out of it, we have the good news that not only death is vanquished by the resurrection, but also that hell is through Gethsemane. The majesty of the victory over hell announced by the words, I am he, caused many to prostrate themselves on the ground. From amongst the band of soldiers and officers, and from the chiefs of the priests and the Pharisees who had come to arrest him, the soul of Origen was also prostrated in the face of the victory over eternal hell and moved by the revelation contained in his words, it is I, spoken by him who had just come from eternal hell. This is why Origen himself knew with certain knowledge that there would be no damned at the end of the world, and that the devil also would be saved. And whoever meditates on the sweat and blood in Gethsemane, and in the words, it is I, or I am he, announcing the eternal victory over eternal hell, will know with certain knowledge that eternal hell exists as a reality, but if it will be empty at the end of time.
Wow.
Yeah.
There's a lot.
There's a lot. Just you can take all the time in the world you need to process that. I just wanted to share that with you.
It might take an eternity. I mean, just right off the bat, there is some really just.
I want to tell you guys, my sister had a dream once, and she dreamt that she was in heaven. Okay. And she walked in, nobody could see her. And there was this sofa setting, big overstuffed leather couches. And there were all these guys, and they were smoking pipes and cigars, and their heads were all touching, and they were talking about theology, right? And this smoke was rising up from the center of them, from all their pipes and cigars. And they were arguing with each other, and she heard a laughter sound, and she turned, and there was this huge door. There was a wall, but there was a huge door, and it was open. And there was a carousel in that room. And there were all these children on the carousel, and Jesus was pushing them really fast. And they were all screaming and laughing with joy. And he was jumping up on the carousel with them, right? And she said, these guys were in heaven. The guys sitting on the leather couches, they were in heaven, and they didn't know it. That was the image she had, right? And Jesus was inviting them, he left the doors open, and the kids were making a lot of noise, and he was inviting them to come and play, right? and be.
Well,
And
you know,
I don't know. I
do
just
you
thought that
remember
was
the
really
video? Do you remember the
interesting.
video I did with Laura where I was talking, where I titled the video that Jordan Peterson was harrowing hell?
I
No.
don't remember.
Okay, so I gave I it was a provocative title, but I meant it. It's like, and I think like we're supposed to be imitating Christ.
Mm.
I would agree
And the
with that.
harrowing of hell is one of the things. And once you start to think about, if you start thinking about hell in the way that Tomberg is kind of like pushing us toward, you can see
That's
how
beautiful, Nate. Yeah.
we can actually imitate the harrowing of hell. We can help to bring people out of hell. Just as if Christ is in us and we're showing Christ to them, we can harrow hell too.
Mm.
We can bring them out of that place. We can bring them out of despair and into hope. And so the problem of hell doesn't cease to be a problem just because one is a universalist. In fact, if anything, it suddenly puts an even larger burden on one if one takes it seriously.
Yes, exactly. And we're, this gets to the whole idea of heaven on earth, right? And the fact that we're like, I just was watching, and I sent it to you, Nate, and I'm gonna send it to you, Ted. Charlie Brooks just made the most incredible video. He titled it, "I'm not LARPing, you're LARPing." And it was a response, to Luke's live stream that day.
Mm-hmm.
And he says so many amazing things in that video. I sent it to Paul Vanderklay, actually.
Okay.
It's a 20-minute video, but he's talking about what Charlie's talking about there, and I don't even know if I can say it right, is that because we think we know, we can't see that we are actually living in paradise. Right? Like, and I said this recently too, like if God is everywhere present, filling all things, then we are walking with him in the garden.
Well, yeah, but that's very good. It's such a poet move. And it's such a poet move, and there's a way in which like what he's saying is absolutely has to be correct.
It's an amazing video. Okay, like if anybody watches this, they have to go find Charlie's video. It's under Satori Pilgrim, Satori Pilgrim.
But here's the thing, though, is that it doesn't become in order for it to become actualized, then we need to be actively harrowing hell.
Yes, and
because
I think
that's the condition under which it becomes actualized, so that everyone can see it.
But that's love.
Right.
That's what you want.
It is only when hell is empty that the eschaton can possibly be realized.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Mm. That's what love does, right? Love goes to hell.
Yeah, it's the bodhisattva spirit.
And preaches the good news. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, there's plenty of it around. So plenty of hell around.
Way too much. Yeah.
I do think this is just one more thing that's been, thinking again, moving it up to the level of our action rather than an eschatological view. And thinking about this again, this notion of the spiral, right? That hell is a spiral, that it's a progress down. And you can see that in your life over time, or you can see it in your heart now. Like both of those are true. But this notion of limbo. So again, say the dark image, if you like, of limbo. Right? We've been talking a lot about the positive, but the dark is that to be in a place of light and learning and all this goodness, and to not have hope, that's the doorstep to hell. So there's something there. There's something there about this capacity to have the virtue of hope is, well, to not have it, even with all the other good things, is to be on the way to hell, to be on the highway to hell. It's almost to say, look, moral behavior is good, but if you have moral behavior and don't have hope, you're on your way to hell still. And like that's something.
That's the light shined in the darkness, but the darkness comprehended it not.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that I think there's some of that in this canto, right?
Mhm.
There's a lot of that in this
Well,
canto.
it's just so interesting that, you have, the last canto, he says, and then they went down, right? And
Yeah.
it's just so bleak and it's so terrifying, and so you're expecting like even worse, and yet you come to this place of beauty with green meadows and a citadel and 7 arches and a brook flowing around and and light. It's interesting.
It's just I'm just fascinated with a sort of polarity to this image, right? The
Absolutely.
one I keep thinking of Lewis. He makes this great statement about life where he says, if you think that this is everything, then it's a hellish world. But if you consider this a pilgrim way, then all of a sudden it's this wonderful prison full of light, sunlight, and flowers and all these great things. And so there's this sort of, what do you demand? What are you asking your current life to be? Are you asking for it to be everything that fulfills you utterly, which is to be without hope, by the way? To ask that your life right now is everything that, everything is to live without hope, because there's no movement towards some sort of union with God. But if you're walking with hope, which means that you're going to meet God someday, then all of a sudden your life opens up into into a garden.
Well, it's
With
to have specifically,
light.
it's to have that what you were talking about there. That is because he says they have desire without hope, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, I think that like hope, like, indicates that desire has some direction
Yes.
to it.
That's
It's not.
yes.
It's
Yes.
not a. It's not a directionless desire.
Mm-hmm.
If you
And
have
desire
hope,
is, there's a favorite. I talked about this yesterday too on the Voxer. There's a favorite verse of mine that I find just really kind of mind blowing, because it says, "Delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart."
Yes, Sherry. I've loved that one for years. Oh, it's unbelievable. It's like a trick. It's
It's
almost
a
like
total trick. That
yes.
is such a trick, Ted. I'm so glad you get excited about that verse, because I'm just like, this is the best verse ever. It goes
well,
like this. It goes bloop 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 bloop
Yeah,
bloop bloop.
because
bloop.
you're like, oh, all I have to do is delight myself in God, and then I'll
think
just get
about what
whatever I want.
Rilke
Yeah,
is saying about the
that's not
will
it.
Yeah,
in that poem.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But it's like, okay, no, Sherry, that makes me so happy. Also, 3 or 4 times now in this conversation, I've thought about you and Jess's talk, like Chino wrap up.
Mhm.
That was one of my favorite things in the last year that people have put out. And you're retelling that particular part of the Golden Key where where Tingle's there with the is it the Old Man of the Sea?
Yeah.
Or is it
Or the old man of the earth. Or
the Old
no,
Man
the
of the
old
Earth?
the old
It's
man
the Old
of
Man of the Earth.
no, it's when she's standing, when he's got the door open and she has to go to the old man of the earth.
No,
And the
oh, no, I think she's going to go to the Old Man of the Fire. Any rate, but it's the trap. No, it's worse than a door. It's a trap door.
it's a trap door into a tunnel of hot steaming water.
I know, and she stands there looking at it for 3 years,
Yeah.
and then she jumps in, and we've had a couple of those moments at the beginning of the Divine Comedy where it's can you jump in? Like, can you jump in? Can you because right, what's a river do? It takes you where it's going to go, and Dante is going to be taken, he's going to be, because he'll die if he doesn't keep walking, right? That's the thing. He will die. Like, if he stops walking, he'll be in hell. Like, it's it's that
He'll be
simple.
there. He'll be stuck
Yeah.
there.
He'll
He'll
be
be
stuck
stuck
there.
there.
And so there's because, and that is what one of the things that hope does, is it, Nate, to your point, it transforms desire. It makes it directional. Hope moves desire. Now all of a sudden, because this is the beautiful thing, and this is the whole notion of, we call it, ordering your appetites, and that sounds really dry, but like, that's what it is. Even your desires become a vehicle of the approach to the divine with the virtue of hope.
Right, yes, right. And also, by the way, both hope and faith are only virtues for the journey.
That's right. Yes.
Because it's all like, when you've reached the journey's end, it's only love. There's no more need for faith or hope, because because love is the ultimate end.
Well, because that's when you are known. That's when you know as you are known. Like for that, you know,
Right.
that verse.
And you don't need hope anymore because you have it.
It's there. It's
And
real.
you don't need faith
Actual.
because you're living it.
No,
It's your experience.
you're in total, like you have this perfectly rounded comprehension of every, you know, you've got, you know, your name, and it's all a recognition. Like it isn't new knowledge.
Well, I am having so much fun with this. I thank you both for joining me. I think we can put a wrap on Canto 4. And I'll see you next time for Canto 5. Thank you, all of us, for following along. Does anyone have any last words that before we wrap this up?
For sure. I don't know if she has any.
I'm sorry, I'm
All choked up.
I'm all choked up.
Literally.
Yeah. No,
Wow.
this is I don't know if you planned it, but that Rilke poem was that was a wonderful piece to put in dialogue with this. And I just think
We just started talking about translation before we got, before we kind of while we were kind of waiting. And she's like, "Hey, I translated this Rilke poem. I think my translation's better than the."
yeah, it was just it's very I think it just really expresses the spirit of Dante the Pilgrim, and I love that. Maybe we can it'd be fun if we slowly like built up a corpus of these sort of poetic works that we see as really connecting with the Divine Comedy. I mean, it doesn't
Yeah,
even,
no, actually, I think that's
just
just like if as you're reading a canto in preparation, if you see a poem that you think connects to the themes that we're going to be dealing with, then by all means bring it and share it. We can.
I think it's just naturally connecting. Like poems are jumping out at us. Like the more poetry that I read, the more I answer questions with a poem.
This is so true. Yeah. This came up yesterday in our conversation. It's amazing. I mean, and then the little conversation you two were having about translation before this, where it's like, and then especially with scripture, where you just come back down to, you're like, well, I'm just going to say the thing that the poet said, because to say anything else would be to say something less.
Yeah.
Thank you all. I'll tell you right now.
So wait, as a reminder here, let me give you one more chance to plug your event that you have coming up in Arkansas.
Yeah. So
when and where?
So Nate, I'm going to shoot you the link to the page for it, because I think if I try to post it in the comments, YouTube just kicks links out. It is in Arkansas. It's in Central Arkansas. So if you're in the area, even if you're not, fly in. We've got a little camp. It's like a Christian camp that we've got rented out for a weekend, for a Friday and Saturday. And in keeping with tradition, we'll have paintball on Thursday if you want to show up a day early. It'll be the Warrior Poets paintball event. And then we're talking about basically how poetry, like what's the value of poetry, and with a pretty strong emphasis on like how it's worked on the speakers who are coming, like how it's worked on their lives.
Who's coming?
So I've got it's a low key thing. I've got Dr. Jim and Father Eric, and then Dr. Jim obviously on Eliot, because he just can't talk without talking about Eliot, and Father Eric talking about the Psalms in his life as a Roman Catholic priest, and then I'm talking about Gerard Manley Hopkins, because that one just he got me. Boy, did he get me. And then I'm trying to make it be less of an emphasis of these speakers and more of, we're going to have time if people want to come and read poetry that they love, read it or recite it, and then poetry that they've written as well. And so anyone who comes will have opportunities for both of those to share that with people. And it really, like we said at the beginning of this is not about being a poetry scholar or knowing poetry, but it's about loving poetry.
Yeah.
So if you love it, come, because there'll be a bunch of other
I'm
people.
really sad I can't go.
I know it's a long travel for you, Sherry. And especially if you still got animals. And then for people who want to love poetry, or are interested in it, but feel like it's like above their pay grade, I really hope that this is a time to realize I mean, this is it too. Like what we're doing here, it's not about being able to like pick apart specific references to other poets or anything like that. It is about, well, Nate, seeing the witness of poetry. It's about being witnesses to. That's what that's what I think it's about. It's about having the humility to be witnessed to. And so, yeah, there should be a link in the description, and it'll be lovely. Arkansas in November is wonderful. We're far enough south that the weather's still really nice, and there'll be color in the trees and campfires and all that. So
you're making me have feelings that I shouldn't have, like envy.
Well, I'm sorry, Terry. I don't want to be in your case of sin for you. Thank you all. This is
all right. So
this is so cool to me because look, that insight about Dante and Virgil walking over the river in limbo has I don't want to talk about it because it has to do with the rest of the Divine Comedy, but like I feel like the two of you bringing this stuff up and giving it to me has like unlocked some major thing in my understanding of the poem. And I love this. Like how long have I been sitting with Divine Comedy, and it's like, oh wow, I just see there's this whole new dimension to it that just opened up for me. So I'm loving it.
I'm loving it too.
This is a little bit long, and it's going to just drag us out by a few seconds. But you talked about joy, Ted, and the importance of joy, right? And how being on this path without it is not being anywhere, really. And there's a beautiful poem by a Belgian poet named Emile Verhaeren. It's called Joy. So I just want to read it since we're dragging poetry into this. I hope I don't cough. I have a sticky thing in my throat. Oh, splendid, spacious day irradiate with flaming dawns when earth shows yet more fair, her ardent beauty proud without alloy, and wakening life breathes out her perfume rare so potently that all intoxicate our ravished being rushes upon joy. Be thanked mine eyes that now ye still shine clear beneath my furrowed brow, to see afar the light vibrating there, and you, my hands, that in the sun yet thrill, and you, my fingers, that glow golden still, among the golden fruit upon the wall where hollyhocks stand tall. Be thanked, my body, that thyself dost bear, yet firm and swift and quivering to the touch of the quick breezes or of winds profound, and you, straight frame and lungs outbreathing wide, along the shore or on the mountainside, the sharp and radiant air that bathes and grips the mighty worlds around. O festal mornings, calm in loveliness, rose whose pure face the dewdrops all caress, birds flying toward us like some presage white, gardens of somber shade or frailest light. What time the ample summer warms the glade, I love you, roads, by which came hither late she who held hidden in her hands my fate. I love you, distant marshes, woods austere, and to its depths I love the earth, where here, beneath my feet, my dead are to rest are laid. So I exist in all that doth surround and penetrate me, all this grassy ground, these hidden paths and many a copse of beach, clear water that no clouding shadows reach. You have become to me myself, because you are my memory. In you my life prolonged forever seems. I shape, I am all that has filled my dreams. In that horizon vast that dazzles me, trees shimmering with gold, my pride are ye, and like the knots upon your trunk, my will strengthens my power to sane, staunch labor still. Rose of the pearl-hued gardens, when you kiss my brow, a touch of living flame it is. To me all seems one thrill of ardor, beauty, wild caress, and I, in this world drunkenness, so multiply myself in all that gleams on dazzled eyes, that my heart fainting vents itself in cries. O leaps of fervor, strong, profound, and sweet, as though some great wing swept thee off thy feet. If thou hast felt them upward, hearing thee toward infinity, complain not, man, even in the evil day. Whatever disaster takes thee for her prey, thou to thyself shalt say that once, for one short instant all supreme, which time may not destroy, thou yet hast tasted with quick beating heart sweet, formidable joy. And that thy soul, beguiling thee to set as in a dream, hath fused thy very being's inmost part with the unanimous great founts of power, and that day supreme, that single hour, hath made a god of thee.
That's really resonant. Well, first of all, that's awesome, and that's super, super resonant with the passage from Tom Berg that I read.
Yes. Isn't that the most amazing poem?
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Wow. Y'all have a great Saturday.
Yeah, you too, Ted. Thanks for doing this.
We're all just a couple inches higher off the ground right now, hey?
Thank you for joining me today.